right, should we go ahead and get started? Yes. All right, welcome to the Monday, March 18th, 2019 work session of the Falls Church City Council. We are delighted to have you all with us this evening. Before we get started, maybe we could have a moment of silence for the victims in Christchurch, the mosque shooting. All right, thank you. So, Mr. Shields, I guess we have two items on the agenda, the Tree Commission and the Budget Work Session.
Yes, sir.
All right.
So Kate Reich is here, our city arborist, and she can tell you about the Tree Commission's desires to change its name to the Urban Forestry Commission and add an alternate member.
So the city's urban forest, is that on or on? Okay, the city's urban forest is made up primarily of its trees, but it's also the interaction between trees, lawns, shrubs, wildlife, all of those things together. The Tree Commission, as the Tree Commission, can interact with all of those things, but it's their preference, and I support their preference, to be called the Urban Forestry Commission because of the fact that they do have the city's larger goals of urban forestry and urban forest management in mind, and not just trees, which are the primary part of the urban forest, but not all of the urban forest. So it would be just a way of, just that little name change would recognize that what they look at is a little bit bigger than just the trees. So instead of being a commission that recommends this particular species or that species or one particular tree to be saved, they really are taking the higher level view, the policy level view, and I think it's nice to reflect that in their name.
So they're trying to see the forest through the trees.
Yes.
It just came to me like 30 seconds ago when I wanted to get it out for. Yeah.
And then the second item, the Tree Commission, or Urban Forestry Commission, has only 5 members. And probably 2 or 3 times a year, they can't get a quorum at one of their meetings. They would like to add an alternate member. So they're well aware that if they added another regular member, they'd have to actually add 2 regular members in order to keep an odd number. And that would make it that much harder to get a quorum. So they're not looking to add more regular members, but they thought that by adding an alternate member, they'd be more likely to get a quorum, and the alternate would vote only if if another regular member was absent. So those are their 2 requests that we'd like you to consider. They could be processed at once as a code change with both of those items, or you could consider one and not the other. It's at this point out for your consideration.
All right, well, thank you very much. What do people think? Any comments? Yes, of course.
Thank you. Just regarding urban forestry. So we all have an idea of what the Tree Commission does now. Will the Tree Commission then look at the planters, where we have shrubs and trees, or will they look, how will their mission change with the name change?
Again, at the policy level, they will not be directing staff. So for example, our green space manager currently, Jeremy Edwards, has been doing a great job of taking our natural areas and removing invasive species and replanting with natives. Those are the kinds of things that an urban forestry commission could recommend. In this case, not necessary because we're already doing it, but that's what I mean, is that they would look at planters not as individual planters. They wouldn't be out there. They're not plant experts and they're not tree experts. It would not be their job to go out and assess the planters, but it might be part of their job to say, you know, I think we need a policy addressing these planters. That's the kind of thing that, yes, could expand a little bit to beyond trees into the things that associate with the trees. Planters, natural areas primarily, those 2 items would be more clearly under their purview than they are now.
All right, who's next?
Is there anything else that they might like to have in their purview? Or just the forestry related?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You know, they're used to being associated primarily with trees. It's just that when you get into the natural areas, at Crossman Park, Cavalier Trail Park, Howard E. Herman, it's not just trees, and there isn't a commission that has any interaction with those things. And it seemed like they are the most reasonable commission. There is the Habitat Restoration Team that's part of the Environmental Sustainability Council.
Right.
But at this point, they are a subgroup of the Sustainability Council that doesn't even have any ESC members on it, I don't think. Or maybe Chris McLeod was going to join.
Yeah.
But in general, it's a group that's kind of separate from the ESC. That could continue. That doesn't need to be transferred. It's just that the Tree Commission wants to be recognized as looking at the bigger picture.
Right.
I don't think they want more power. They just want the bigger picture.
And we've heard a lot in recent weeks about the urban heat island effect. And I would think that's another area where an urban forestry commission would have
Right.
some education knowledge.
Which reminds me, there was one other thing that has been concerning them a lot, and that is recommending green space around commercial and mixed-use developments. Well, green space by itself is not necessarily a tree issue, but it is an urban forestry issue. And they are very keen on promoting that, so it would be nice to make it clearer that their purview is the whole urban forest and not just trees.
All right. Ms. Hardy, then Mr. Lichtenhouse.
I think I'm fine with the name change. I had a question about their role currently on residential redevelopments. So I know while we spend a lot of time talking about special exceptions and mixed use, I think we actually impact far more land with all of the residential redevelopment that happens. What sort of role does the Tree Commission or future Urban Forestry Commission play in kind of reviewing the impact of redevelopment, whether it's, clear cutting those lots or tree replacement, or is that more of a staff function?
It's both. So the staff reviews each grading plan. That would be me. So the grading plans are all reviewed by me, but there are a lot of them. The Tree Commission does not review those. However, the Tree Commission is very active in thinking about whether our codes and our regulations are achieving what they're meant to achieve. The Tree Commission was key in getting a study from Virginia Tech in like 2012 to 2014, where they looked at about 20 different sites that had been redeveloped, residential sites that had been redeveloped, and found that in fact they were on track either to meet or exceed the 20% canopy goal within 20 years. So those are the kinds of things they look at, the bigger picture. Very much involved in, once the Chapter 5 Natural Resources and Environment for the comprehensive plan has been updated, still on track for this year, we hope. Once that's been finished, using the goals in that comprehensive plan update to update the tree-related code is definitely on the Tree Commission's radar. That's what they would like to do, look at how can we preserve more mature trees. All of these things, as I said, the urban forestry at a bigger picture is definitely what the Tree Commission has been talking about, looking at, thinking about.
Okay. My second question has to do with the alternate. I did read the letter from the city clerk who manages our boards and commissions, and she kind of states that all the other city boards that have 5 members don't have alternates, and so this
Right.
would be kind of a unique thing that we would be doing.
Right.
I guess what, did the Tree Commission kind of review the thoughts from the clerk and then still decide that they wanted to make that recommendation, or what were their thoughts on kind of the...
They did. So at first, they wanted to add more members, and I chatted with the city clerk, and she expressed her reservations at that. And when I brought it back to the Tree Commission, they understood that, and they thought, looking through code, looking at some other boards and commissions, that alternates might be another way to go. So they asked me to proceed with making that recommendation for an alternate, knowing that Celeste does object to it.
Okay. I do think that her point of view is really important, because I think the only ones that actually have alternates are the BZA and the planning, and another kind of planning board, the BZA and the AAB, I think. So kind of serve a different function than the rest of our boards and commissions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Kate, does anybody in any of the commissions or boards have a specific mandate around urban farming?
No. No.
Is that something that the new Urban Forestry Commission would be willing to take on?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's something that's important that's been lost. As we talk about the greening of Falls Church, it is important for us to commit more green space within commercial developments and a commitment to tree canopy on residential development. But the idea of urban farming and what that means for the greening of the city, for me, is something important that I'm passionate about as well. And I would love to see a commission take that on, both from an educational perspective, because we do teach to some extent, that in the schools through some of the programs that they have. But you combine the composting with the idea that we want to be Tree City USA and the rest of the greening of the city, and that piece that kind of fills that full kind of life cycle is the urban farming piece, and is something that I would love for someone to take on as a mandate, again, both from an education and putting in practice as well.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. So I like the urban forestry name. I think that's good. I think it's okay if they want to expand their scope and power, whatever power any of us has here. I would be particularly interested, as I think Ms. Hardy was beginning to discuss, that we have this fall, once we've finished all the things that we're absorbed with right now, a good look with the city attorney and stormwater management people and so forth at the residential tree canopy issue. Is the percentage that we have now really acceptable? Vice Mayor mentioned this too. I think it'd be great if we have more people involved in that discussion to understand, because I think most residents don't understand why it is that all trees have to be cut down when a little house like mine is torn down for a big house, that's going to succeed it. And you know why, and you've explained to us, but there are not enough people in the neighborhood and in the community as a whole that do understand that. So I think if the Urban Forestry Committee would spearhead a real, cross group look at that would be good. I don't know about the extra members. So they have 5 members now, and a quorum is 3. Is that right?
Yes.
So they're saying that sometimes they can't get 3 people to come to a meeting, and so that would only be 2, and 2's not really a meeting. I mean, it's
Right.
not really legally even a meeting.
Exactly, and that tends to happen like the night before or on the night of, when we're expecting a full house and somebody doesn't show, and then it's just, they figured if they had an alternate, then there would be a greater likelihood of having 3 voting members present.
I guess, it seems surprising that an issue that is so passionately felt about here in the city, has difficulty meeting a 3-person quorum. I mean, that's kind of surprising, really. It makes me wonder about whether we are deployed. You mentioned the ESC and its subcommittee, and I mean, there are plainly more than 2 people in the city of Falls Church who care about urban forestry issues, and to try to get 3 of them together once a month, just if we can't manage that, then I think we have a larger issue that we need to discuss. And I don't know whether it's the orientation of what the group's doing, or the
Right.
night of the meetings or something, but I don't know. The technical question that the clerk raised was, so let's say that the Urban Forestry Commission is going to hear the presentation, just for as an example, about the West Falls Church Economic Development Project, and you've got an alternate, and the alternate attends that first meeting and hears the presentation. But the next time when the committee gathers to discuss its positions and statement on the issue, the regular member swings back in and didn't see the first presentation, but is the one who really has the vote. That there's a messiness to that seems undesirable.
True.
I mean,
but
I feel like the alternate should be the one who, was involved in the deciding vote if that person was the one who was in the first meeting. Did they address that at all? I mean, because a lot of the things that we do span certainly 2 meetings or maybe even multiple meetings.
Right, but I think, except for the Streetscape Task Force, I can't recall a time when only one member of the Tree Commission was delegated to attend a meeting. In general, there will always be the entire Tree Commission invited. So I can't foresee a time when the alternate would be selected to represent the Tree Commission. Because they're the alternate, they really couldn't be selected to
Well, I guess
represent
I
the
was
Tree
thinking, I hear
Commission.
what you're saying. I was thinking about, like the whole Tree Commission's invited to hear the presentation, like the other night, the Tree Commission, the AB, PC, and the ESC. All,
Right.
I don't know how many Tree Commission people were there. I think there were more
2.
than, okay,
Yeah.
well, there were 2. All right, that's. I mean,
Same
that's-
thing
that's
again.
a-
We were expecting 4 and 2 begged off at the last
That's
minute.
a good example of
Right.
you got to be able to stir up a third person. You just have to. I mean, in my opinion, for
It is
a
difficult
meeting that
because-
important.
yeah.
And,
I
and-
do think that the Tree Commission members, all 5 of them, are dedicated. They really do care about the urban forest, but they are busy people, as we all are, and it just happens every once in a while that 3 or more of them have other commitments on a meeting night. So it's not that there are any regular members who just chronically don't show up. It's more like those things where all of a sudden one night 3 people can't make it and you've got no quorum.
Okay, well, I guess I have to think about that a little bit more. I would like to talk with the clerk, because, yeah, we do put her views in pretty strong stead, too, so, thanks.
Yes. And at this point, do recognize that I am bringing up 2 separate items, and you can choose to carry them both forward or just one.
All right, Mr. Z.
Thank you, Mayor. So what's in a name? Tree commission, I think we all understand that they only deal with trees. But for the same reason that the urban forestry commission wants to be stood up to address a more holistic, context-sensitive part of our relationship with the green landscape, I think it is something that speaks to where we are in this century. The Environmental Services Commission changed their name to the Environmental Sustainability Council and going away from their early roots as people that just try to get you to mulch your leaves and to what else do they do? Oh, they picked up the cigarette butts on the street. So environmental services. Now it's the Environmental Sustainability Council, and, they've gone to policy and all kinds of things that have a much larger effect. So we're no longer asking citizens to pick up cigarette butts. We're asking them to have a policy voice in our city. And I think that's what the Urban Forestry Commission does. They were also toying with Urban Forestry and Urban Biodiversity Council, which, mouthful, I mean, it could be farming, it could be bunnies, it could be a whole bunch of stuff, but they just said, well, maybe one step at a time. So I support that. Name change. Issue 2. The Little City is known worldwide as a municipality with the highest median income, the healthiest, best educated, and probably a bunch of other bests. And that just means that the people that serve on the tree commission, which I'm a liaison to, they're highly paid people. They have really demanding day jobs, whether it's in government or private industry, and they don't always are able to come and meet on this topic, which incites their passion. Having an alternate with this limited number of staff, I think I've spoken to the city clerk. I understand their point of view. So on one hand, we can continue to beat the bushes, metaphorically, to get more people to join up and make sure they show up each and every time, or we can do what other boards have done, the BZA in particular. It speaks to how we view their importance, that we think it's important enough to have them have sufficient body to form a quorum. It's probably that simple. And so in my mind, I support that point of view as well, that we have an alternate for that commission, just like the AAB and the BZA. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. So did you need feedback from us tonight as to these 2 items more than you've heard already, or?
I don't think so, but at some point I will need to know whether to put it on a future agenda for the city council.
Yeah, of course.
Regarding the 5 members on most boards and commissions, there are other boards and commissions that also have problems making a quorum.
Yes.
I know I'm the liaison to the Human Services Advisory Committee and the Aurora House Advisory Committee, and probably 1/3 of those meetings get canceled for the same reason, that they can't get a quorum, and I'm sure other ones run into the same problem as well. So I feel like we shouldn't just, if we're going to make a decision to allow one board and commission to have an alternate, it should really be a citywide decision, and we need to look at some of what the clerk is saying before we make an official decision on that one, really look at where we are. And I know there are 3 appointments committee members here. So you have done a lot of interviews for people on those boards and commissions. Are there extra are there people that are applying that aren't getting seats? That in some cases? Okay.
So
We need to do like a
Maybe we could just
broad
do
look
this
at boards and commissions and membership, or?
Maybe we can just do, well, we do suggest that if this is not suitable for you, or if it's oversubscribed, that would you consider doing this other thing? And we've been successful with a bunch of that, but if their heart is set on housing, then they're not going to do trees, and vice versa. Even though some of these people are, they want to serve the city. So if I can't be on EDA, maybe I'll do the housing services instead. So we have citizens like that think of the greater interest of the city. I suggest that we do this as a compromise, that instead of making this a really big deal, we just perhaps look at how this would work and let it run for 6 months. If it's successful, then we'll, promulgate it, spread it far and wide. And if it doesn't work, then we need to do something else, if that's okay.
All right, what do folks think? I think on the name thing, I think probably everybody's okay, change the name, so that one's done. The second question is, what do we do about the alternate issue? And we've heard I think a reasonable compromise, although it'd probably be nice to hear from the clerk as well,
Yeah.
because we value her opinion. So did you have some?
Certainly value the clerk's opinion, but I would say, Kate here is making a plea, saying that they need folks to get quorum. And going through a name change and also their input as we work through some of these commercial and economic development initiatives are going to be important. And so if she's taking the time to come here and for lack of a better term, commission for, or petition, I should say, for an additional member, I'm on board with allowing that, even if it's a one-off. If it's going to create a logistical issue for the clerk, then we can wait to hear, but from my standpoint, I support it.
The mayor's not going to be able to get finished with this as soon as he'd hope. So explain to me then now how this works. So we're going to interview, we're going to advertise the the Urban Forestry Commission has got vacancies. Let's say, 2 vacancies for regular seats, and then there's going to be a vacancy for an alternate. And that position will be described as someone who may attend all the meetings, but will not have the right to vote unless their presence makes up a quorum. Is that sort of how it works?
It's the same way that it works for the BZA. I mean, I was on the BZA, we had an alternate. Alternate shows up to the meetings. If someone can't make it, alternate steps in and is allowed to vote. Otherwise, they don't have a vote. They're just there to consume information and
So that
contribute if needed.
alternate attended as a matter of habit.
Correct.
So
And it did come in handy on many, many occasions for the BZA.
is there a statutory requirement for the BZA and the other?
Possibly. I mean, it's a semi-judicial body, so.
Yeah, right. I mean, to me, that's the difference between
Quasi-judicial.
urban forestry and that, because it is.
I just
But
don't
as
want to. I don't want to
practical matter, the way it
complicate
works.
decisions because you have a lack of attendance. And it makes
Well,
it
I mean,
difficult.
obviously, I'm in the business of making things complicated, I guess. But, I mean, I'm serious about the fact
Your finest
that
quote.
Very true.
in the city of Falls Church, if we can't, as a pretty, regular habit, stir up 3 people to attend an urban forestry commission meeting, then we have a bigger problem than, people are just important and too busy. We have a problem that speaks to whatever it is the commission is doing or not doing, or, its portfolio, or I've been on boards and commissions here for a long time, and some function better than others. And I'm just, I just want some assurance that, this is just a simple problem, and this simple solution, I guess, will.
I mean, I can't speak to folks' schedules, but as someone that has kids on city council, has a job, the struggle is real, and I get it. In some cases, it makes it difficult to get places. So I'm going to give those folks a pass
Struggle
because I'm
is
not
real.
managing their schedules and their calendar. But for God's sake, just give them some breathing room so they feel like they can get some stuff done. That's my take.
And I will say that I'm sorry, but I don't feel that there is dysfunction on the tree commission. I do feel that all those people who are currently members of the tree commission are active most of the time. They just, every once in a while, they have schedule conflicts and don't show up. But I don't get the sense that any of them are not interested or can't be bothered to show up. I don't get that sense at all.
Mr. Snyder, do you have anything to say on this stuff? No? Smart man, all right. Vice Mayor Connolly?
It just occurred to me too. Doesn't the tree commission have a situation where you have a husband and wife appointed? Does that
Yes.
have anything to do with attendance?
Not always. One of them will sometimes attend. So that doesn't define the problem, no.
Does this require council action?
Yes, but because the tree commission and its membership are in code, they can't be changed except by changing the code, and that requires council action.
So does this need a first reading, a second reading?
Yep, first reading, a second reading, and a trip to the planning commission.
All right, well, so we got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Why don't we just call what we've done today, and then we can go ahead and in the meantime hear from the clerk and put this on for a first reading, then at the
Right.
first reading, figure
Okay.
out what we
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah, to
So
Mary
if you
Beth's
can- yeah.
request, though, could we ask the clerk for opinion on evaluating whether we should add alternates for all the other ones that might be five-person boards? Because I think, I'm just a fan of consistency. So if we think we have quorum issues with this one and we want to elevate the importance of this one, I don't want to say that housing and HHS and that the other ones aren't important either. And if that's the right move to do for this one, then we should consider it for the other ones.
Great.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right, let's keep on moving, Mr. Shields.
Thank you. Mayor Charter, I'm going to, and members of council, I'd like to invite Mr. Snyder, Mr. Schlitt, and Chief Gavin up to the table. So in terms of our order, what I think we'll do tonight is first talk a little bit about what's in the budget with these three departments. And the staff presentations are going to be short. They're going to be really kind of geared to the council work plan, the high-level initiatives. And then there's time for, if the council wants to take the discussion in a different direction, that you can do that. We'll start with Jim Snyder to talk about initiatives and CPEDs. Then from there we'll go to public safety with the chief, and then from there to rec and parks. After this discussion with these three department directors, we do have the ordinances that are before council for first reading at your next meeting, and we can end the meeting with a discussion, just any questions about the technical nature of those. With that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Snyder, who will give the first presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, and thank you, Council and Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to talk to you about community planning and economic development services. As you know, there is a lot going on in the city. You all are at the tip of the spear, really, for that. And we need staff to keep up with all the things that are happening. As a result, and trying to look ahead, the manager's budget proposes to add 2 building inspectors, and these will also be doing some plan review to our staff and make a fire safety inspector add more hours so it becomes a full-time equivalent. I believe it may be going from half-time to either 3/4 time. But this is all to try to keep up with what's going on here in the city. The funds for these increases, and these will be term-type employees, comes from the permit fees that we collect as a part of our building plan review. That covers plan review and inspections. Just looking ahead at some of the things that are going on, the new high school, for example, just submitted its plans. And plans, they literally came in today, they're about this thick in 3 volumes. That's the half-size version. That's going to be over 300,000 feet. They plan to start June 15th. They want to be done and occupied December of 2020, an 18-month build. Very aggressive. We're going to be very involved in reviewing those plans and in reviewing the construction and trying to problem solve as we go. We need more people to do that.
Which project were you just talking about?
I mentioned the high school.
Oh, that's the high.
That's the high school.
Okay, sure, yeah.
We have Founders Row, which, think of Tinner Hill and 301 West Broad. It is the equivalent of those two together. And as you know, they're removing buildings right now. They're going to be digging and coming out of the ground. Very big substructure of structured parking, and then multiple buildings, complex buildings that'll be going up. We're going to need a team of people to do that work. The trailers that they've gotten, we've asked in both cases to have larger trailers so that our inspectors can be on-site and do work on-site, solve problems on-site, not have to come back and forth to City Hall to figure out a solution to a problem that's been identified. We're kind of unique because we review the plans and we inspect the buildings. Part of that is because we're small, but also part of it is because we have very experienced people. So we have the resources to add these positions, and I think we'll be well served by having them. I think there's going to be a lot of competition for this kind of person in the region, particularly as Arlington ramps up with Amazon and other projects. There are lots of people who are going to be needed to do all that work. And when the West End project gets approved at 1.4 million square feet, that's about 3 Founders Rows. That will take, many years to get built. So there is a lot of work to be done, a lot of things going on. I haven't mentioned Columbia Baptist, which is submitting plans, or other projects like the library, which are coming through. So we're going to be very busy. If we don't have these people, we're not going to be able to do somebody's, plan review for their house or their addition or commercial fit out. So we want to be able to be ahead of this, and so this is very much appreciated, the manager's proposal here to do this work. And I know the fire marshals also is going to be very appreciative to have someone who can do the fire inspections as well. One of our goals in the city is to have vibrant commercial districts, and there is a proposal to use some of the $90,000 in the hotel tax that was created not too long ago to continue to do tree lighting, flower baskets, sidewalk sweeping, and to help fund a part-time downtown coordinator. That's a good use for this. I think a focused approach, we'll begin to see some more results. And having someone to help program and manage some of that activity, and again, this is a part-time position, I think, under 20 hours, if I'm correct, will be a help. We have not finished that job description. That's something where we're going to need input from Parks and Rec and other departments, but I think if we can find the right person to help with that, that can help us make advances. You are aware, probably, no doubt, of the money that was achieved through grants to help fund the economic development project, the $15.7 million of state money that's going to help do undergrounding, sidewalks, and other infrastructure improvements at the West End site. That's, I'm sure, a big factor in our success with our development partner there. So there's going to be work on that, and we also have new grant funds for neighborhood traffic calming. I think we're identifying some $636,000 in FY20 for neighborhood traffic calming. And there's about $2.3 million for that program in the 10-year CIP. So those are some of the highlights of what we're doing. We are a combined department now with economic development, planning, zoning, building safety, building plan review, and the counter. And I think that has been a success in us working more effectively together. So I'd love to get your feedback and try to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you very much. Are we going to do these one by one? Is that sort of the idea with questions?
That was the idea.
Okay. So, Jim, thank you very much for your presentation. I think you're doing a great job. A lot of the economic development that we're seeing now, I think your fingerprints are all over it, and we really appreciate the good work you've done. Do we have questions or comments for Mr. Snyder? Okay, Ms. Hardy.
Great. I will echo the mayor's thanks, Jim. Really terrific work. While we're clearly very busy right now and will be the next kind of 3 to 5 years, I want to make sure that we're investing in kind of a pipeline beyond that. What sort of resources do we think we need to make sure the economic engine of the city continues beyond Founders Row and the West End project? So while that's going to keep us really busy, I want to make sure that we're not short-sighted and we're really investing for the long term.
I will say, excuse my voice, I'm sorry. I will say there are a number of projects which may come alive. Broad in Washington, I think we'll do that. There are projects that Atlantic Realty are now looking at. Now they've bought in the VB&T Bank site. There are other sites that are being looked at where Homestretch and the 2 office buildings are, that the Quinn Zone. So there is a lot of interest in the city. I think we will need to continue to be active in working with people to expedite plans. You recall the technical assistance plan that was done by ULI and COG for the East End. When the West End small area plans are done, you're going to need to move to the East End and do planning there. So I think all the planning work we're doing, and then the active, proactive work by the Planning Commission, City Council to move things along, will assure a good pipeline for us. There also is the coordination with Fairfax County and UVA Virginia Tech, and I believe there will be spillover and other effects to the east of the West End area in the shopping centers and the Gordon Road Triangle. So I think we just need to keep our eye on the ball, make sure we have enough resources to cover these things, and we don't, if we see ourselves getting behind, we bring the resources forward to get the job done.
'Cause it sounds like I'm supportive of all the additions that we're adding this year, because those are the kind of the boots on the ground to kind of work on the projects we've got at hand.
Right.
It sounds like to make sure that we keep the pipeline going, though, is you really need kind of a business development person, someone to kind of work with kind of the businesses or the landowners out there to kind of figure out what could go here, which I think is largely a function that you're playing. But I know that when our former economic development director retired, that was kind of an open position that we then kind of restructured. So again, maybe when we're on the other side of the West End deal, something that we want to think about how to structure that team long-term so that we are putting that focus on long-term business development for the city. I think traditionally would have, in a private world, what would be called business development.
We are not a large staff. I think we've got, our department is pretty effective, very effective for its size. So as more capacity is needed, we'll have to see how that fits in with the overall city goals and its ability to fund all the needed services.
I
So
did
you
have a
to
tactical
balance that.
question.
Yeah.
We had originally, I think, put in a rec for the West Falls Church PM, which I know Carly has kind of taken on by sliding over from planning. Is that kind of unspent money that we still have, or is that kind of in this budget already?
In the budget.
budget.
And we have backfilled and hired an additional planner behind Carly. So that money is in the budget, but it's also a filled position.
Thanks.
All right, before we continue on, I'm going to read a disclaimer that I do around budget season, and I suspect the Vice Mayor may do as well. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of the FY 2020 budget. My wife's an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons that may be affected by the FY 2019 budget. I can participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
And I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of the FY 2020 budget. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I am a member of a group of 3 or more persons that may be affected by the FY 2019 budget. I can participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right. Mr. Duncan, it's your turn.
Thank you. So the manager knows where I'm going with this because I brought it up before. Founders Row is obviously delayed by about, I don't know, a year or so from what we thought when we were working on the budget, 2 years ago. We had talked about, ramping up inspectors to deal with Founders Row, and then we didn't need to because Founders Row, took a while to bake. So we didn't actually fill any inspector positions on spec there before Founders Row was ready, did we? Or did we?
Correct, we did not.
Okay, so this is basically where we were at, I feel like it's been a couple of years ago where we said we're going to add inspectors for that and then everything else that goes with it. Okay, thank you. The question that I posed the other day, Jim, I think when you weren't here, the counter that serves the public, you talk about the guys being on site in the trailer, that's good, that's great, but yeah, those people are then not there to handle the deck permit or the small business bakery or whatever. Is this staffing up going to, you think, enable you to staff the counter, during all business hours? Because I think now there's some time every week or every month when the counter is not manned for whatever reason.
We have a professional day once a month where we close and try to catch up on the back end of permits and things like that, plan review, training, departmental meetings. One of the things that happens is you may take the application. There's a whole lot of, it's like a lot of things. It's below the waterline is a whole lot of other work. And so that has been helpful for us to get training, to catch up on work, to close out permits, to ship off plans. So I think it's a productive use of our time. I think the additional, it's one of the people we're looking at who's retiring from Arlington but still wants to keep working, has a lot of experience doing this kind of thing. And so we're going to look and see whether that can help us with continuing that kind of effort and also doing walkthroughs. It's have to find these people. To get really high-quality people, and so we're looking for the right people to fill this. We have someone we're working with to fill one position at this point.
Okay, well, it's not our job to micromanage how you manage your office. That's why we hire the manager. I'm not familiar with what other departments do. I'm sure every department has got, professional training needs and needs to catch up and so forth. I just want to make sure that we're dealing equitably across all lines of service with our hours that we staff. And if there's some virtual way to, starting out, let's just make sure that everybody on the planet within earshot knows when that day is that you guys are doing what you're doing, and not have somebody come expecting to pull a demo permit, on that Wednesday and then find out, gosh, I can't do it. At minimum, let's make sure that that date is well publicized, well and widely. And then just in terms of all the other offices in City Hall, let's just make sure that we're treating everybody equally. Everybody gets the equal shot at professional development and catch up and so forth. I think that's an important thing to do. But, especially as we move into the new City Hall, I think it would be nice to have it open for business, all business, at all hours, if possible. That's just
One thing I will mention, it's going to be a challenge in City Hall because we're going to be in different wings and different floors, and we'll have to adjust to, a new situation from what we've been for the last year plus. And so I'm sure there will be some bumps in the road as we all learn how to work the new building. So I think it's important to have that communication with the Treasurer's Office and the Commissioner's Office. One thing that we've talked a lot about with the Treasurer and Commissioner is there an ability for people to pay? Could we do more electronic payments so that the people who really need help, and rather than a regular customer, can have that time as opposed to someone who's having to manually bring things in? We can do payments over the phone now, but we don't have an ability to do electronic, pay for your building permit kind of thing. So that's something that, as we have more capacity and we're able to work that in with the network and everything else that the city's doing, that would be a good goal long-term, because regular customers would find that very convenient, not to have to come to the city to do that kind of thing. The electronic plan review, I think, has been very helpful for those who use it. They can email plans and they can get responses back. And we do have, I think, particularly with the reorganization, excellent communication between economic development and the business community and the inspectors who are trying to get these businesses open, whether it's, a plan that needs a change or an inspection on site. Our people do a lot of accommodation of those special requests. So I think overall, as you look at the area, we have a very good reputation in that regard.
Thank you. One other thing, I'm sorry I didn't bring it up, but what, the downtown position, did you say the job description? Are we going to approve this position in the budget effective July 1st, and then the job description will have been written by then or after that? And what is downtown, by the way? That's, Ms. Hardy's downtown includes lights all the way up to the Giant, so that's my downtown too. So is this like a facilitator, coordinator for a lot of things, or is it literally, within the metes and bounds of whatever downtown is?
Well, downtown is a special plan. We have a plan for downtown. We also have revitalization areas that the city has approved, which are, West Broad Street. So I think a lot of this has to do with, as we get the, refurbishment of the downtown park done, working on programming, working with small business people, trying to coordinate activities that promote small business and engage them. We've had some difficulties in the past with, goals that were at cross purposes with some of the small businesses. So I think trying to get them more involved and as partners in downtown and for the Main Street of Broad Street shopping areas is what this is about. And there's a lot of, Ms. Hardy and others have been out taking flyers around. Actual communication on the street with people is very effective, but it takes bodies to do that. So this is a start in that direction. Some of you might be familiar with what Arlington did a number of years ago, whether it was CPRO or the Clarendon Alliance, or the Boston Partnership, or the Roslyn Renaissance, or now the Crystal City. Some of those are now bids, where they tax and do major programs. So they started with very small efforts like this.
Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I support and amplify the comments about your service to the city. It's much appreciated, and thank you for everything that you do. I would submit that if you have any difficulties in communications in your newly renovated digs, that you consider sticky notes to drones. You can just have them fly autonomously between the different departments, and the people can peel off the messages meant for them. When you mentioned that that one of your initiatives was electronic payments for services, I would completely support that for those that are tech savvy, people like Ross Litgenhouse, who are perhaps interested in putting in their own home security system made by Simply Safe or somebody else, that there's a requirement to get a permit. And that might be an estoppel for someone who doesn't have the time to actually go down and file a permit, fill out the form, and do all that and pay it online. And in the meantime, hypothetically, his house would be unsafe because he doesn't have a Simply Safe system installed. So if you could get working on that sooner is better than later. I would certainly appreciate it. Thank you very much. And lastly, I do have one more. It is a request that has been made principally by Ms. Hardy, but I will do that tonight, which is that when it comes to neighborhood traffic calming, there's a ratio of city time and services that we spend on staff time versus the actual cost of the contract itself, and so I would like to have that ratio examined and over the last 3 years and brought before us to tell us what the ratio is of staff time and that cost versus actually direct cost. So we have a understanding of actually what that amount of money would do for us going forward. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thanks. So, Jim, I think the world of you. The number of projects that you guys are taking on with the size of the staff that you have, it is commendable. I will tell you, I was a little disappointed when I saw the budget coming from your department, simply because, and I think this goes without saying, what we're going to be up against from an economic development perspective in terms of branding the city, the visibility, the marketing, the outreach, attending the conferences that we need to in order to attract and retain the businesses, as you know, are just going to be exponentially amplified as these projects come online. But again, we are, trying to balance budgets here within a city, and we've got, we've got a lot of considerations. But I think as well as I do that once these projects deliver, the focus it's going to be on Falls Church and the demand from an economic development perspective from your office is going to be far greater than it is today. And just, my experience in the private sector is that, to some extent, you've got to hire ahead of the curve. So that you've got this stuff coming down the pipe, and in order to, I would say, appropriately monetize those opportunities, you got to be ahead of it. And that's almost a 12 to 18 month hire to get in front of that. So all this to say, we've accomplished a lot as it relates to getting the West End site marketed to developers to get people interested. You guys have done a lot in terms of outreach, but I'm starting to get a little concerned that we're not far enough out ahead of this project. And I think that maybe there's a lot of folks that don't realize this, but the number of conversations that take place about Falls Church on a weekly basis out in the commercial real estate industry, I mean, it's constant. It is constant. And there are a lot of people looking to see what happens with these projects. And there's a lot of people that are looking at Falls Church as it relates to the spinoff from Amazon. And it's going to be considerable. And it would be in the city's best interest, it would behoove us to be fully prepared to make sure that we've got folks out in the industry that are helping support the city to draw in the businesses that we need to tenant the spaces that are coming into these developments, to give people the information they need to feel comfortable that they're making the right decision. And frankly, from a public outreach perspective, to marry citizen concern with business interest and I want to say mediating that to some extent, but there's got to be an exchange of information. And again, I used the word exponential, but it's only going to become exponentially greater over the next 24 months. And we need to think about whether it's allocating resources, but at least putting a more, and not to say this is an app, so I'm not going to speak for what you guys are doing, but a structured content calendar that we push out about the projects that are taking place and getting that out to larger venues. I mean, what we've done at NAOP, which really has been kind of beg, borrow, and steal resources to get that kind of thing done, really needs to be a constant, vigilant activity that we do, whether it's NAOP, ULI, ICSC, at the various conferences, but we need to have a bit more of some prominent visibility to make sure that we stay ahead of this, because I am concerned that we won't fully capitalize on all of the hard work that's being done to get these projects here. And I may be preaching to the choir to some extent. So whether it's in this budget or the next budget, or it's a shifting of resources when things free up, we need to have a focused, concentrated plan to make sure that we are throwing enough resources from economic development out into the market to stay ahead of a lot of this. And because I am starting to get concerned that we're going to deliver these beautiful, amazing projects, or we're going to get halfway there and then we're just going to be absolutely consumed and way out ahead of our skis in terms of being able to manage the interest that's going to be inbound that we have not experienced yet to date. So for what that's worth, Jim.
I appreciate it. We have had very good partners without a lot of expenditure in NAOP and ULI and COG, and so that's a wonderful thing, and it's a blessing for the community. But your points are well taken. As you start delivering things, there will be more and more pressure and demand.
All right, any other comments? I just have a few. One, again, appreciate your work. I think we've really raised the bar here in the city, and a lot of the thanks to that goes to you as far as planning, urban design, and attracting new business, new development. I do want to make sure, and I think this is something that's already been said in some regards, but continue and increase our emphasis on walkability, bikeability, traffic calming, long-term planning, which I think we're seeing the fruits of now. The groundwork for what we're seeing now was laid years ago, and some of the first area plans we did a while back. I do support upgrading the downtown and better maintaining that area. I'd like to see the street tree lights expanded as well. And so I think there's a lot of good things happening now. We just got to keep it going and maybe accelerate a little bit. But I want to thank you again for the great work you've done so far.
Well, thank you. That reflects on all my colleagues. I'd be remiss if I didn't note Paul Stoddard, who's taken on the planning director's job, and is now doing it full-time. So you have a full-time focused, the organization has afforded that. He's doing a great job creating team, bringing in new people, organizing the group, and giving the Planning Commission the kind of service and resources that it needs to do a good job. Carly Aubrey stepping over to fill the key job on economic development. Mr. Manager, from everything I can tell, she's doing extraordinary work, and we are fortunate to have her here. Keita Ruzzi, who is Deputy Zoning Administrator, along with John Boyle, move things through, keep doing a lot of great work. And Becky Witzman, who kind of did economic development as a one-person shop, has been an extraordinary partner and colleague, and I just have the utmost respect for her and my other colleagues, along with all the building safety team who are out there every day in the cold and the wet and the rain. It's been a hard year to be out in the field. So I just want to thank my colleagues for all their good work. So.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's move on to our next
Wyatt,
department.
if I could, just before the chief starts, I do want to make sure council knows that we have, through our online system, a module that we will be deploying online services that will allow us to do the online payment and also online recruiting. So that's a result of last year's budget approval from council, and we've been slowly doing the training and the implementation process for that to roll out.
All right. Thank you much. Ms. Hardy.
I think I remember this in the budget presentation, but maybe it's in DPW, but a lot of the parking and spot improvements that I know this council pays a lot of attention to, we've talked about, is that here in CPEDS or is that DPW?
That's in DPW, but it needs to be a collaborative effort. That's meant to be, so it's $100,000 for spot improvements, and it's meant to be for the downtown area. or for pedestrian improvements. And a big chunk of it will be plan driven, but some of it will be, things pop up where a big group of people come to a council meeting, and there's like something easy we can do rather than going out and hunt money for it. We'll have some allocated.
Great. So similar to NTC, I guess my question is I guess we have this list that was circulating over the winter of kind of pedestrian improvements that we've spotted, that we've talked about. Similar to NTC, how much can 100,000 do? And is that enough? Do we need more people to put against those? Because I think those are the ones that we often react to, and I want to make sure we also have appropriate staff to actually do it too.
Yeah, I think we do. It's always a struggle. Everyone, our staff are fully subscribed, and so when there's new things, it's always a challenge to say, okay, we need to create, we need to carve out some additional time for this new thing. It's always a challenge. And sometimes it doesn't happen immediately because we need to get to do the promises we've already made. But I think we're staffed adequately.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Two quick questions, not for answer tonight, but I'd like them on the record. First of all, the status of the Broad and Washington project. And then secondly, I would like to see a strategic plan in terms of business outreach, especially focused on the opportunities that Amazon may present. I'd like to see a plan at some point presented to the council to make sure that we are maximizing. I think Councilmember Lichtenhouse was going down that road in a lot of his comments, so I'd like to see something tangible in that direction, again, in the future when it can be done. Thank you.
In terms of Broad and Washington, it's kind of on hold. We hear noises that they may be activating it in the future. Presently, it's probably good it's not under construction because we're going to have a lot on our plate with what's active this moment. But I don't know if you've heard anything more from them, but
Well, I get all my information from you, so.
I think it's a site that something will happen. It's got to go through some of the, there've been issues with that site.
When do the options expire?
I think it was a 3-year approval, so they need to get the site plan approved, and one of the pieces related to that, I think, is that median cut. So there are a few hurdles yet, but still would need to happen before it could start construction.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we might want a session with the city attorney as well on that, so thanks.
All right, Chief, welcome.
Good evening. I'm just going to not dive right into public safety, but I go back to the building safety and how we're involved in the building safety, because as you will see, the fire safety inspector is increased from a temporary part-time and a half FTE to 3/4 FTE, and that would be the fire inspector, who is probably responsible for 300 inspections throughout the city a year on average. And in a lot of those inspections, he issues permits, gives out violations. As Tom Polare likes to say, where CPEDs may give birth to a building with all that deep work, actually the fire marshal and services actually maintain the continuity of the resilience to the building. What we also do in a lot of these pre-planning is to read the plans for safety purposes, not only the first time, but each time there's a revision. So each time there's a revision for the blueprints of a building, the fire marshal and his team review those plans, which is significant. And with the increase of plans, that's been increased workload. So I just wanted to make mention to that because that's under building safety. But the overall budget highlights for public safety. One thing I'd just like to highlight, in the last 4 years, we've probably seen an increase of calls for service on average about 15% each year. 1 year maybe 20, 1 year maybe 8, you get into 18, but on average about 15% without any increase in staffing. The last time we were at 33 officers, which were proposed to go to, was about 10 years ago. The crime rate has risen. Since then, obviously the calls for service have risen, which has a direct effect on the investigations that have increased, including some of the services such as for admin services. You know, we have taken on red light, 2 programs for red light, which is about 7,000 views a year. And that's an officer looking at each and every one of those and then going to court for that as well with no increase. On average, what we have, about 3 officers out on the street as a minimum staffing each night. The goal is to get us to at least 4 for, 1, calls for service, getting there timely, and also for officer safety purposes. So adding 1 officer this next year, what we would probably do is put that into operations. In the past 5 years, we have eliminated 2 of the specialized positions and put them in operations to get to the calls for service. One was the traffic officer that we had several years ago, and one was the community services officer that was kind of like a part-time SRO. But those are back into operations for calls for service. So it's a multiple year plan to kind of address the growing trend of calls for service, for the increased crime, for the increased people. And I think this is one thing that the city has not experienced is a dense populated area in and around a metro area. Having policed in Arlington, and particularly in Roslyn, Clarendon, and Ballston, where I worked with the Roslyn Renaissance, the Ballston Partnership, and the Clarendon Alliance. It was really important, those partnerships, because what was happening in and around those metro stations is the density of crime, because it's a density of people and visitors. So I think what Falls Church will experience, not only just based on population, but they will see an increase in crime. So I believe that the multi-year plan and increasing staffing at a responsible rate is the right route to go. In terms of what you see here, in terms of the reoccurring cost for the police department, we have 3 new police cars, and actually we do about 4 new computers for those police cars each year. And the reason we do that is the fleet and the computers and the renewal is probably the most essential tool that the officer has out on the street. It's essentially their office, and it's essential to their services. A police car lasts probably 3 to 4 years on average, not only in mileage, but in idle time. And we run ours probably 4 to 5 years. In administrative cars, or even longer, 5 to 6 years. That is a program we started probably around 6 to 7 years ago, and it works out very well for us. And it's been beneficial for keeping down maintenance, the downtime of vehicles, and keeping a fleet, a healthy fleet for the officers. But for the most part, that's it in a nutshell in terms of where we're at. The plan is to have a multi-year plan of increasing staffing responsibly, so we don't bite it off all at one time, and to keep our fingers on the pulse of all the growth, and keep our police vehicles in rotation like we have.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. I do have a couple questions. First of all, with the expected addition of 1,000 new residential units in the West Falls Church development, and as you mentioned, these are going to be higher, more dense than we've seen so far. I think my question is, and this is really for the city manager and the city attorney, should we be considering voluntary proffers for both police and fire protection? So that's a question in addition to whatever we put into the budget. And I do support the additional police officer. On the fire side, let's talk about that for a minute. Do we have the resources that we need? Do we need, for example, something on the west end, either a facility, or do we need more apparatus, more staffing? The status of our mutual aid agreements with Fairfax and Arlington. So the same question that I think you've asked and answered with police, I would ask and have answered with fire and EMS service as well, because the challenges are going to be very similar. Next question is the situation with gangs in the region. We read about a particularly gruesome crime with a gang apparently based in Fairfax that committed a murder in Maryland. My question to you is, do we have adequate resources now put into those issues? I think this region has done a very, very good job, but that one in particular caught my attention with its brutality. Next question is cybercrime. We recognize that while it's not a physical crime in the sense that many of us are sort of used to that the fact of the matter is that a major regional damage can be done in a split second with the right sort of cyber incident. So the question is, and this is also for the city manager, who do we have handling not only the cyber defenses of the city, but what we're doing with respect to our businesses and residences in those areas. So those are some of the questions that I have. I don't need answers tonight particularly. I don't want to prolong this session, but Chief, if you have any initial answers to provide, I'd be pleased to have them, and you could provide additional in the future as well. Thanks.
One thing I'd like to just highlight in terms of fire service is that the new fire chief, we have had an overall meeting with him, very supportive. I see that as an excellent and strong partnership. With Fire Station 6 is one of the 2 locations within Arlington County that houses a ladder truck. And with mid-rises to high-rises on the west end, I think what you'll find is that the continued service of having a ladder truck near and dear is good. What you also find in the Jefferson and the Fairfax side of the house off Graham Road, they're building a brand-new firehouse on the Fairfax side and in Seven Corners, that area. So I think we are surrounded by some highly professional, comprehensive fire services. They've been very good to us, EMS services as well. I think the hybrid formula we have here is unique. And being that most of my fire guys are retired Arlington, it makes it very easy to get either, may it be the fire marshal services or investigations or a quick call to any type of emergency call here. It's been seamless in my time here. As far as gang resources, we are members of the Gang Task Force, the Northern Virginia Gang Task Force. We pay $25,000 a year for that service. We have utilized that service more for intelligence and prevention purposes here in the city because we have had kids at risk in our community, in our schools, and they drop everything and come in anytime we have any type of intelligence leading them into an investigation. They keep us apprised every week of all the information that's going on in the region with each case. So I feel very supported by the Gang Task Force. And out of the 17 jurisdictions that are at the academy that we are regionally partnered with, most agencies have a detective assigned to the Gang Task Force, and in addition to that, add the $25,000. We don't have the numbers to add a detective, but doesn't matter. They're highly supportive, regardless where the activity may be in the city. And they give us all the information regionally as to what's going on. In terms of cybercrime, I would agree with you. I think there's some things we can do in terms of prevention for businesses in cybercrime. But most of the times when we have a cybercrime type issue, it's assigned to a detective and it gets beyond our means in terms of the assets, the resources that we have. We work with state police and also the FBI. Lots of times, much like any complex coordinated criminal network, cybercrime is well beyond our borders within seconds. So we need to reach out to the state and FBI to assist us in most instances like that. But I think we could do probably more in terms of prevention and getting into the weeds of how do you help businesses prevent cybercrime, to include ourselves.
All right, Vice Mayor Conley.
Thanks, Chief Gavin. This is just a a staffing question.
Okay.
Last year when we talked about staffing, you said you didn't need staff and you were having trouble filling the positions that you had because of turnover or people who weren't available. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, I
No?
don't
Okay.
remember that.
All right, all right.
I don't think I've ever said I didn't need staffing.
But this seems to be the first time in a long time that we've added a police officer.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes,
And
it
I
is.
feel like we ask you that question every year. Do you need a police officer? And you say no, or we've got it covered this way and that way.
Right.
Okay.
The priorities each year, sometimes we end up with trying to get administrative staff because we have a hole in administrative staff. The officer piece is expensive. And sometimes I know we can't, in terms of balancing the whole city budget, we can't take that big bite off. But we are at a place now where between the calls for service, the minimum staffing, the economic development before us, we need to take that next step in trying to build and increase staffing. But if I've ever said that we did not need staffing, I did not mean that. I take that back, but I don't think I did.
So, yes. So as we continue growing,
Yes.
like what's another 2,000 people we need more police officers? How do you figure that? What's
Right.
the ratio there?
Yeah, you could do it a number of ways. There's like 4 different formulas that you could be looking at in terms of how you would increase staffing. You could do calls for service, you could do crime rate, you could do population, you could do a hybrid of all. And you could do by minimum staffing or what the budget dictates. That's how people kind of look into it. And ICMA, I think, has a number of formulas in which you can do. And the best thing for you to do is actually take your staffing numbers. 60% of most of police department staffing is in operations, and then 40% is based on supportive administrative roles. I will tell you, I stay up at night sometimes worried about our minimum staffing. To have 3 officers on the street in a midnight is kind of scary, particularly when you have a full state theater with the leg warmers. And, in the city is a busy place. And you get, from the Eden Center to the State Theater, now to the West End, with really high-density populations, it's very difficult to staff. You have 1 DUI that gets a little surly out on the street, that's 2 officers taken away, and then you only have 1. And so that keeps me up at night thinking that, that 1 officer is not going to be able to respond to that emergency. And the basic calls for service, if you're asking for mutual aid and basic calls for services, your partners don't want to be coming over here to take your calls for service. They'll come in a heartbeat to assist you in an emergency, and they do. And by all means, they don't hesitate. But your basic calls for service, and I think some of you have probably been subject to waiting for us for a call for service. And that's because our calls for service are going up and our staffing has not. So.
All right, Mr. Z.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for everything that you do and all your efforts that most of which we don't know about to keep us safe and secure. My question goes to retention and turnover. Can you give us the I don't know how you measure the average time in the city for your force, and more importantly to me is whether it's measured in years and whether it's going up or going down or whatever. So it goes to retention, turnover. You don't have to answer that question tonight, but I think it would be interest to all of us here. It's what you have up on the presentation screen is a not too subtle message that with respect to multi-year plan to increase staffing due to population growth is that next year we probably should expect to see 1 more officer added, and I would endorse that forthwith at this very moment in time. I think we need that, and we should plan to budget for that. Because quite frankly, it's scary if you only have the ability to deploy 3 officers on the street at any one time. If there's a primary responder and a backup, and there's some other call that comes along that requires backup, I'm not getting a warm and fuzzy on how you get 4 people on the street to take care of 2 incidents that require 2 officers each. So we cannot be under capacity. We need to be over capacity at all times. I think that, the time for fear that we're, need to spend money on other things rather than security is past us. I think we need to do what we need to do to ensure that we have adequate force. Whether it's some distracted driver that has managed to total 3 cars on your street and it takes the police over 20 minutes to respond, which doesn't make any of the people in the neighborhood happy. And that's just minor compared to everything else you do all day long. So I think, again, being over capacity, 4 officers on the street where you can is would be where I would go with this. And my final question is with regard to multifamily, high-rise, mid-rise buildings. I would assume that the response profile is probably different than for a single-family house, and I don't know what that is, but I'm sure you do. And so, what are the requirements for that per se? And I would be delighted if you could just spend a few minutes sometime during this budget cycle to educate all of us on what that response profile would be for multifamily versus single-family. Thank you.
Well, just real quickly on the retention and turnover issue, I usually lose 2 a year. And so oftentimes, and it takes about, from a person that has never been a police officer, it takes about 18 months till I get them on the road where they can actually perform on their own. So there's this balancing act of hiring. If I can get somebody that's certified, I can usually get them back on the street within 6 to 8 months after being certified through field training and understanding the whole city and the ordinances and all of the field training standards in which they have to pass. So it's always a balancing act of trying to hire people, staying within the budget and the authorized staffing of 32. I don't know the age, though. You asked an age, the average age of the department at this point. I'll have to get back to you on
Well,
that.
how long they've been in the department, whether it's, we've,
Yeah, length of tenure. I'll have to get back
Right.
to you on that.
the trend
and-
over the last few years, so.
Okay. The vertical policing question, that's a great question. Yes, I've been involved in that. It does take, it takes a period of time to understand, okay, when we get ETAs or the estimated time of arrival, which I know Mr. Snyder usually asks me every year in terms of, our response time, it does increase with vertical policing. With the exception is, and Jim just put this little bug in my ear, oftentimes when you have substations and or community-based stations in high-rise districts, it does give you an increased ability to get there quicker. We're going to try and measure the calls for service in a different way when an officer arrives on the scene versus when an officer is with the complainant. Because the response time could be measured, I could drive up to, let's say, the Spectrum, but it may take me about 4 or 5 minutes to get to the apartment to get to the problem. What we're thinking about is adding another level of response time into our CAD system and RMS system so we can figure out what that little delta may be. But vertical policing, it is important. There are a number of different communities, and I know when we were in Arlington and we started with Clarendon, because I was in that beat when Clarendon was built, is that we ended up having a substation at the Department of Human Services out there right on the Wilson Boulevard. And it was helpful because we could be seen at street level. People would walk in to make reports and or we could respond quicker, usually on bicycles. And then I think that's Crystal City had one. So, was that all the questions I asked? Okay. All right.
Well, unless you care to answer 2021 right now.
2021?
Staffing level?
That'd be 34.
Well, you mentioned a multi-year plan, so, it begs the obvious question, what we're going to see
Yeah.
next year.
All right. Ms. Hardy, then Mr. Lichtenhouse, and then Mr. Duncan.
Okay. Thank you, Chief, for your leadership and just great partnership in the community. I love it when people come up to me and tell me that Chief Gavin is my hero. So great work. A bunch of different questions. In general, I think a theme I'm going to have for public safety as well as rec and parks is really how do we make sure we enforce and maintain what we're building, whether it's population, parks, buildings, et cetera. So I'm glad to see that we're adding a police officer because I think as we build that population, I think everything you've presented the case for, it makes sense. I had a question around red light cameras, because I asked about this last year, especially when I read the budget book again, and really the payback really seems to be within 8 months. And so as we think about speeding, which is one of the top things we often hear about during public comment, if we can free up a police officer to not enforce speeding on East Broad Street, for example, because I know that every time I drive by, there's usually an officer parked around Cherry Street. If we can add extra red light cameras in that stretch of corridor, which based on the data, it pays for itself within 8 months. We see an uptake in the summons over the past 3 years. In fact, they've grown from, it looks like 5,400 in 2017, or at least 2,700 for half the year, so estimated to 5,400 in 2017 to 6,200 in 2018. So clearly with more cars on the streets, we're catching more people, we're bringing more revenue, and hopefully we're also deterring, knowing that the cameras are there, hopefully people are speeding less. Is there a business case actually to think about adding more cameras in addition to this police officer so that we could actually free up another officer to do other things around the community, manage speeding, for example, in the neighborhoods? Because I think that's an investment that this council, given all the feedback we hear about speeding and neighborhood traffic calming, might consider making.
I'm not certain that the cameras are going to free up an officer. I mean, there has been studies, certainly by Major Campbell and Captain Uhlman, to expand that program. They're not against expanding that program. Certainly the buses expand it very quickly. But it's not necessarily going to free up an officer. In all truthfulness, it might actually put an officer behind a desk more often to view those, because each and every violation has to be viewed by an officer, which sometimes is hard to manage because the timeline, you have to have it within 10 days, it has to be mailed out, because the calls for service are not necessarily traffic generated. The officers are doing their own proactive policing with traffic, but the calls for service are essential services by people calling in and needing services for all different types of things. Traffic is something that they do with their spare time when they have it. But I'm not opposed to expanding the red light. I just know that the red light program, it's sometimes difficult to manage because of the timelines and the fact that we feel it's really important to the integrity of the system to ensure that we do it right. We do it with a sworn officer, and with 7,000 interactions, and those are the ones where we actually get a summons, and then there's those that we decline. So there's probably more. I'm not sure that's freeing up an officer. But I'm not opposed to adding that. And the ones I think that they said that they probably would add first is Annandale at Washington. I think that intersection was one that they had great interest in.
Are there places where they use maybe like an outsourced like resource to kind of review that data, or does it have to be a sworn officer doing it?
The state code requires it to be a sworn officer.
Okay. On enforcement, so in our commercial areas, we've added a bunch of kind of 2-hour parking restrictions, and I think in our residential areas, we just added the program on Grove and Park. I know we have currently 1.5 parking enforcement officers. We added that 0.5 last year to help with it. Do we feel good about that staffing levels to make sure that we're enforcing kind of those restrictions that we've added?
I do. I think that's, at this point, I think we're at a good place. And plus, they not only focus on, you know, the current parking status, they do a lot of parking complaints. They do a lot of traffic control. They can do a lot of public safety service that an officer can do, but they don't have laws of arrest and are not going on domestics and those type of criminal type things. But yeah, I think 2 right now is a good number for us. And you know, construction this year is going to be difficult. It'll be a good test this year. Traffic is probably my number 2 problem in terms of complaints. First, it would be traffic, and second would be parking. Did I say traffic? I said parking. Parking is my number 2, and sometimes it becomes number 1 real quick.
And then my last question is around the new vehicles. So it sounds like it's just time for a couple new ones. Is it time for us to consider kind of phasing in a more green fleet? So given the conversation we had, I think 2 weeks ago, when we heard from a bunch of citizens about kind of ways that city could be more green. As we think about police vehicles and just other cars, I know we always do the cost benefit of whether it makes sense to go electric. But I figured we should ask again.
Sure. I have been driving a hybrid up until this past 2 weeks. I would dare say that is, it was fine for administrative core, but the battery packs were not supportive of a lot of police equipment. Although I've been told that Ford is coming out with a hybrid police interceptor this next year, not this year, but this next year. It's something we should probably look towards, at least with administrative staff and parking and possibly even detectives. And then, because I think the patrol cars, I'd like to test with administrative staff first, because the patrol cars have a lot of equipment, from the cameras to the radios, to the flashlights, to all of the bells and whistles that they have in those police cars. Sometimes hybrid batteries cannot sustain all of that, but it coming out as a police interceptor should be the real test. So this next year is the first year Ford does that. So we would look into that.
My request, I guess, for city staff is if we're thinking about other cars besides police cars that have less demand on, power, that we consider it elsewhere too.
Mr. Lichtenhouse.
You're going to get Teslas for you guys, Chief.
Okay.
Yeah, Tesla, the nice ones, the Model S, the ones that go 0 to 60 in like 1 second. I'm just kidding.
Volvo's gonna
Don't
be
put
all
that in the
electric.
newspaper.
Yeah, the Volvo's gonna be all electric.
That'd be the
by
complete
2020,
opposite. I just noticed under trends and issues, you had mentioned technology needs, and I shouldn't assume. Is that in material supplies and other? Is that where that goes in departmental budget? Technology? Wyatt, Kieran, anybody that's a number cruncher?
Can you fill out a little bit more of the question of where you're going?
Trends and issues. Expenditures on technology was something that was mentioned, but I noticed that in materials, supplies, and other, which is where I assume at least some of that technology spend goes, that's actually declining. That's pretty consistent across all the budgets and the breakdown. So my question is, one, if it's an issue that we're focused on, especially as we continue to densify, what are the considerations do we need to make for technology? Are we spending enough? I know body cameras aren't cheap.
I don't have body cameras. I'm probably not going to body cameras, and the reason being is that we have a pretty robust in-car camera, which shows not only the officer, but whoever is in front of them, granted, if they're in front of the car. What is also really pretty, it's a great technology, is that the microphones that are on the officer catch everything in terms of what they're saying and doing in a home, or it's associated with the in-car camera. The in-car camera system is in the cruiser, and you can rotate it any which way. If you're going into a house, you could rotate it towards the house, and then you catch everything that's going on through the body mic. Those have been extremely helpful. I do believe that the body camera is just a tool. It's not something that's mandatory. And I'm not certain it's the right thing for this community. I do believe, regardless, even if you call the police into your home, you still have a degree of privacy. The microphone is helpful, but the body camera is invasive. I think that we have had great success with the in-car cameras, and we've had them over a decade. As far as technology, we're always reevaluating where we are with technology. Some of the things that I think that will be on our plate very soon with dispatch is going to be E911 and some of the changes with text 911. Some of the technology with criminal investigations is just, when they have a crime, typically it's associated with a cell phone or a camera or a computer, and you know, I have some great detectives that are asked for mutual aid from other jurisdictions because for their help, because they're up on technology. But we're always circling the wagons, looking at these conferences that we go to, particularly IACP, where it gives us all the up-to-date things that we need in terms of technology. But I think we are doing the best we can within the perimeters of our budget.
Are there things that you would prefer to employ as population continues to grow, as you move into some densification in some of these areas that we're not necessarily thinking about right now? It's not something we have to answer tonight, but talk about the challenges of managing larger mixed-use development, talk about population increase, talk a lot about personnel, but again, just the fact that you guys have pointed out that it's a trend and issue, related to technology. Just curious.
Yes, I think there could be a lot of, when you start talking about crime mapping and trends and things like that, there's a lot of work we could probably do with the new GIS employee and crime analysis.
Okay.
That'd be very helpful.
All right.
I would just make a general comment that, you saw the cut in the budget for materials and supplies in that line item, and I think that is generally across the board what departments had to do in order to balance budgets. And I don't know the details of that line item and what the consequences were, but I think you'll see that in many of the departments in the budgets. Those are the areas that get cut.
Mr. Duncan, do you have a comment?
Thank you. Just to get a little more specific on that vertical policing and what Ross was asking about. So as we plan the Falls Church Gateway project, will we, are we talking with EYA and the partners about a community-based facility up there? Is that desirable? At what stage should we do that? Is that something we should be talking about now?
It is something we should be talking about right now. We've gotten the first draft of voluntary concessions, and public safety is always on our list of things to cover. So when we're doing our staff review of it, we will have the discussion about substation or other needs that we have up there.
Okay, all right, thanks. Chief, 3 now overnight during the day shift. What's the typical per shift count of officers on the street?
It's the minimum is 3, typical's 4. But if someone has day off training, sick, or on light duty, it could go down to 3. The day work, why midnights concerns me more is because nobody's around on midnights other than those that are assigned to work. On day work, what you have is you have all the administrative staff and a lot more people in and around the city that can respond and do respond, so, along with the sheriff's office. But on midnight patrol, when there's 3 of them out there,
They're the only 3 people
they're the only 3
in Falls
people out
Church
there.
who are
And
awake or
the,
not up
the smart watch commanders, and they connect with Arlington, they'll connect with Fairfax and make sure that, they know they have a busy night. They like to alert those watch commanders out there that, they may be a little light and hook up with those people and make sure things are covered. And in those cases where we think there is going to be a busy night, may it be a holiday, a festive holiday, and or a special event within the city, we would hire back one for overtime. And we've done that before. So, and then of course, with schools, we probably do over 50 special events, athletic events with the schools. Oftentimes, when that is going on at night, that is a person that's in the city, which is helpful. So,
and they're being paid some
they're
kind
being
of
paid by
overtime
the schools.
by
Right.
the schools to do that, so they're extra. You mentioned that there was a 15% average increase in calls. Is there any type of call that you're getting more of, or is it vary from year to year? Or
I was looking at that today in terms of, sometimes it influx up or down. I think there's a influx of there's traffic. There's a lot of traffic. And I would dare say a lot of that comes from just the increased number of cars and people. But, these tolls on 66 have forced people into the city because they don't want to pay $25 to get to the Beltway. So they come through Falls Church. Of course, you know, marry that up with the construction, and you're going to have a lot of traffic. But of late, we've had some really serious, actually unfortunate death calls, and nothing, you know, that would be suspicious in anything. It's just people that, you know, there's been quite a few like suicides and some very sensitive calls like that that necessarily you would read about.
What are our pay levels like compared to our other jurisdictions with whom we compete for talent?
You know, most people, what they do is they look at pay levels. They look right at the beginning grade and step, and we're about 51,000 plus. And I think some of our local jurisdictions may be a tick above us, particularly Arlington and maybe Fairfax County. But we're in the game. We're about midway.
And are we recruiting? I know Arlington, you know, recruits as far as Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Are we recruiting locally, or do you have a recruiting budget that is up to the task?
I tell you, I've been very lucky. We have embraced a lot of college interns that bring them on like their junior, senior year and have them work for us for free. And then they want to become police officers, and they're wonderful. They come here knowing our culture, and they want to be here. And we get a sense as to if they're good workers for about 3 to 4 months. And they keep in touch with us. A lot of the mentoring that goes on, may it be in dispatch or in all the divisions through the internships, has been really good work. And actually it's brought in a lot of diversity as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It was Officer Duncan's pathway through to where he started too in college. Well, thanks. I think that's all I had. I hope that you understand that we appreciate everything you do, and that when we move into the new city hall, which is in no small part a public safety driven renovation. I mean, there's a lot of great elements to it, but I'll be proud to have my name and those with whom I serve on that addition, which is, you know, significantly, I hope, going to improve your living quarters compared to what we had before. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other comments, questions? If not, I've got a few things. First, I do want to echo the thanks. I know people in the city have a very high level of satisfaction, at least I believe so, with the police department, your services. So I just want to give you my thanks. I would echo the calls about electric vehicles or environmentally friendly vehicles. I think our community is uniquely situated to take advantage of that because we're not driving great distances, you know. I mean, from one end to the other, it's just a couple miles. And so I would think it'd be good to consider that. Hopefully the technology will improve. I actually did like the Volvos. I think they branded the city beyond just the police department, but almost a sense for economic development and the like. And I've had people tell me from all over the place that, oh, you're the place that has the Volvos. So that's something I think to think about as well. I've had this conversation with you before. I think it's been a few years, but the idea of getting people out walking in our downtown, I know maybe it's a challenge at times, but I do think it's good to have that visibility and let people know you're out there.
Sure.
I also think getting folks maybe, I know we have a strong presence on Broad Street for speeding. I think if it would be great if we could find a way to get occasional service on some of these side streets because, frankly, that's what we hear about. We don't hear about people speeding on Broad Street. We hear about them on the side streets where school kids are waiting to catch buses and the like. And so if you could give some thought or consideration to possibly having, you know, kind of a mobile speed crew or something that would police the speeds in some of our secondary and tertiary roads, I think that would be helpful to consider. I think that's all I've got, but I thank you again for all your good work and your fine service to our community.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so I was interested in your comment about you see traffic diverted from 66. I'd like to follow up on that and get some data. I think that'll be very useful in some regional discussions. Frankly, very, very useful. So anything you can provide would be very helpful with that. Thank you.
Ms. Hardy?
A question I asked, I think, last meeting was around civil asset forfeiture. I don't think we're using that money for the police vehicles, but I think I recall in previous budgets, we did use that revenue. I don't need to answer it now, but I'm curious kind of how much do we get per year and do we rely on it for city spending? I think as there's just discussions in the broader community about the criminal justice reform, I think civil asset forfeiture is kind of in the spotlight. And I'm curious kind of what our take on it is, how much we bring in and what our policies are.
Civil asset forfeiture, it varies through the years depending on the investigation. Back in 1984, the Comprehensive Control Act was created, which created this fund, the Asset Forfeiture Fund, which allowed, the federal, state, and local jurisdictions to come together in a task force to fight complex criminal networks. And so you have that. You have an officer from Falls Church that's on one of those task force that investigates financial initiatives that are supportive of usually drugs, terrorism, those type of complex crimes. And oftentimes what happens is people money launder a lot on the East Coast cigarettes to avoid taxes and gain a lot of money by buying cigarettes in Virginia, selling them in New York, and getting about $5 off a pack, which is huge when you're buying tons and tons of these. And same with drugs. And a lot of that is funneled right overseas towards terrorist organizations. What happens in some of these investigations is the money is frozen in accounts, and the Eastern District does a review. So there's several reviews in the process of where the seized money is from. And once the money is seized, then if whoever's on the task force has the equitable sharing profit, that's where we get ours mostly. We have had local cases where we have seized money from drug dealers, and it's drug money. It's money that is directly being used as an instrument to further the crime. The most recent case from the Supreme Court was a drug case. And the extreme fine that was levied is that the drug dealer, who was a low-level drug dealer that made a low-level case, had, the money taken from him, but he also had a $42,000 Land Rover taken from him, which they thought was excessive comparative to the crime. So I hear what you're saying in terms of there's this balancing act of trying to ensure that we still have the ability and foresight to investigate complex criminal crimes that are happening in and around our community and region. And to dismantle those criminal networks is to cut off their funding and to seize that funding. And then there is also the balance of ensuring that your criminal justice system is fair and they're doing the right thing. From what I understand from the Supreme Court, it was unanimous across the board that they felt like in this case, the Timms case, I think it was called, that it was an excessive fine. In each case, and you will find in the U.S. Eastern District, is they're examining each case for the merit in which it stands. Is it too much money? And if it is, and I think what's going to happen is the courts are going to take a look at the amount of money that's seized versus the criminal network that it's supporting. And that is going to be the measure of how much crime and how much money is seized. But when we're involved in one of those cases, one of my investigators is involved in one of those cases, the task force, there's about 13 entities and memberships. The money is split up into essentially 13 pies. And then it's given to the jurisdictions, usually about 2 to 3 years after the case is resolved. And because it has to go through the U.S. Eastern District, it goes through a process with the federal government as to how it's divided. And then it's distributed to us, sometimes 18 to 2 years later. It's hard to say that, what we get annually, because annually we don't get the same amount, and sometimes it's 3 years out. Locally, we have had a case here in the city back in 2009 where we had a gentleman that was keeping a woman hostage in his apartment. He had 3 long guns, 1 Uzi and 2 handguns, and $48,000 and a 25-pound brick of marijuana. And he was running marijuana back and forth from, I think it was like Arizona. And so we seized that money that was directly related to drug funding, and we bought 2 motorcycles that are still out on the street today. I have to say that the defendant in that case was very proud of the fact that we bought motorcycles because he was a motorcyclist. But there's few local cases that we do have. More of them are federal and state that we've been working. But it's a great question. I mean, it is something that we need to manage, and certainly on the street level, what we need to look at is where an officer may have the opportunity to seize a vehicle away from somebody, we have to ensure that, one, it's an instrument of the crime, that it is perpetuating crime, that the money is directly related to the crime, before that we should be able to seize it. We should take it into property, keep it in safekeeping until such time we get through process with the courts. But I hear you loud and clear that, it has to be just and has to be fair.
More decisions get made on kind of what we can do about it. I want to make sure that we just don't have an over-reliance on it as a revenue source, so that we can, if we become something that's an issue, then we don't depend on it in our annual budget either.
No, I don't think we've ever depended on it. I know that we have benefited from greatly. The 3 goals that I have for seized assets are training, education for the officers, equipment for safety, and security in and around the city. And we've done pretty well. We've got about $60,000 invested in the yard for security with the fences and the trailer. There's probably about $13,000 into the libraries about security cameras. I can't remember the exact number on dispatch furniture and things like that in City Hall, but yeah, about $55,000 in dispatch furniture. So we've reaped many of the benefits of the investigative efforts that we've put into stopping complex criminal networks.
All right.
So.
Well, thank you very much for that fine presentation and your great work on behalf of the city. Danny, you're up. What do you say?
Good evening, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about recreation and parks and its budget and some of the projects we have going on. Something that sticks in my head, and so I think I'm going to veer off just for a moment, is one of the questions that Councilperson Litkenhouse brought up, and a little bit as to what Councilperson Hardy brought up earlier, is that I think if I could bring you into the budgeting process just for a moment, and to think back to when the marching orders come out, and understanding that I know I can speak for myself, and I can pretty much speak for these co-directors here. We are still working within very confined numbers, and these numbers last back to several years. So as we look through these numbers, and you have added contractual costs, and you start looking at it, and I said to myself this year, well, it looks like I only have about $26,000 to figure out how to make all this fit into the numbers we have. I said, that doesn't seem like that much money. Then when it started happening, it was very, very difficult to figure out how you're going to maneuver this and do that and figure this out. Well, it all ends up coming out of materials, supplies, and other, because it just seems to be the one place that doesn't have an effect on a person in the community or a thing that we're doing, an actual program or something we're doing. So I felt that question was very appropriate for kind of what we go through when we're doing it. And I'm certainly not here to complain or place blame on anybody. I know everybody here understands the times we're under, and the chief mentioned it earlier. We're so excited about what's coming up. There's a lot going on. We all understand, and we're all willing to do, keep things at a minimum, as long as we know we're keeping people safe and happy and whatever. But it is something that we, it's a balancing act, and I think everybody here understands that. And I appreciate all council's efforts and really the community on behalf of what we've had in the recreation department over the years. I'm excited about what we have coming in the future. And so as you look at our actual budget, we don't have any new positions. We don't have any increase in positions. So I don't have anything here really to ask much about. And our budget stayed relatively flat. So there's not a lot to talk about there. So I thought tonight might be a good idea to come in and talk to you about some of the big projects we have going on and where they are. There's a lot of projects going on in the city. And ours are just a few of those, and it may have been a while since you've had contact with some of those projects. So I thought tonight would be a good time to come in and speak to those a little bit. So I'm going to start in no particular order or anything with a quick update on what's happening over at Big Chimneys. It's one that's been going on for a long time. They're all near and dear to my heart, but this is one I've been working on for a long time, and certainly am excited about. Really, a lot of our projects are now through a lot of the planning stages and some of the grind pieces, and it's exciting to know that we're going to get to some real construction phases. And Big Chimneys is one of those. We are about 3 weeks away from our. I think I can read without these. We're about 3 weeks away from our from Dewberry getting back to us our 100% plans that include construction documents. Once that gets to us, we're just probably 3 or 4 weeks away from, we have a couple of contractors already in mind, already under contract with the city. One of them that can do everything that's going to be off-site, meaning the large water structure that we're going to need to pipe water down into Shirley Street. If you remember correctly, I don't want to get into it unless you want me to later. I'm happy to do so. So one contractor will handle that, and then another contractor will handle everything inside the park, the actual build. With everything going perfectly, and hopefully it will, we should start construction right around May, and we can be done with everything by the end of July. So that would be a real neat thing for the community there at Big Chimneys. A nice addition to our park system will be the Fellows property. And I want to give you a quick update on that. There's approximately $60,000 available through various ways that I probably can't give you all the intricate details on, but Kieran definitely can if you have questions about that. And the thought process is once the city takes full control of that property, there's a structure on there that will need to be demolished, probably more so deconstructed. And so that's the thought process. We'll have to figure out some cost estimates on that. We're going to get working on that right away. But more importantly is we're going to have to secure that area up front. And I think that $60,000 should be adequate without making the first phone call. I did have the opportunity to get some pricing on some deconstruction several years back for a house that the city had, and then subsequently decided we wouldn't do that, and so we sold it back, and a residence is living in it. But so I do have some previous knowledge on that, and I think the $60,000 should get us to a secure building while we figure out what we're going to do, and after that, some form of deconstruction of those facilities. And the main part of that is that those buildings are really center property. And I went over there again today, and that property, beautiful. It's not humongous. If we ever got into some kind of a process where we decided we wanted to save all that, the park itself would be a difficult build. But those are still conversations. I think deconstruction is where we're headed at this point. And then really what I'd like to do is if we clear the slate clean is our next process will be to go to the public and start a master park planning process, just like we did for 10 other parks in the city about 10 years ago. This one wasn't there yet. It would take a brand new start. We'll go through it. We'll work with the public. We'll figure out what this park is meant for, where it's headed, maybe some of the amenities that should go on there, go through that process. Then we can turn that over to some engineers once some of the money starts coming available in FY 21-22, and then start some architecture engineering and then building of a park. I think you've probably read some of the stuff we've talked about before. I do see this as a little more of a passive, maybe a place for some urban farming. I'd love to do some community gardens and things like that. I don't know if this is the absolute right place. We've heard a lot of talk about some folks wanting some bocce courts. It'd be nice to have just a little place to walk around the park, maybe a small shelter. So there's some ideas we have, but we'd like the neighbors and the community really to be the ones that help build this, as we have in other park structures throughout the time. So that community engagement will take some time. It's probably at least a 10-month process, but that lines up with the CIP funds that are there right now, and so we'll go from there. So I'll move on from that, and we'll certainly be happy to answer questions about that one and talk to you briefly about Larry Graves. Larry Graves, while not on the original schedule we had, is still on a very good schedule for our department and for our community, in that the Fairfax County Park Authority has gotten all their site plan review done. If you recall, Fairfax County Park Authority will be building this. It's on Fairfax County, but we'll be doing it. But everything is ready to go, and Mother Nature has put a little bit of a hold on it, and some bad soils have kind of slowed things down over there. They've got everything figured out. They know what they need to do. There's a process that needs to happen, but it is going to require much drier earth once June 15th gets here. If we get that, then they will start construction on June 15th and complete that right around Labor Day. So that could be perfect. It actually could be better than our original timed process, because we don't have any of our soccer, lacrosse programs in full function during those months. So if that works, that could end up very beneficial to everybody involved. Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park, if you haven't driven by there in the last couple days, please do. There's actual construction going on. Some of the street improvements that are part of the park project are actually underway. You can see the circular piece that will go in there. You might have some questions about it. I think everything as it gets built will answer itself further into the park. We did do some additional work to make sure that the trail erosion that was happening, we had a chance to kind of put that trail in, let it simmer for a few years, figure out where, if it needs a little more salt or pepper or whatever. And we did figure out where there were some issues over there. And so we have put some time and effort into that and some of the funding into that. And now this street frontage and the entranceway is going to be really exciting, and that is underway now. And so you'll see some progress over there, hopefully on a daily, if not a weekly basis as that goes on. And included in that street frontage will be the gateway signage, some benches, trash, recycling receptacles, bike racks, and some nice plantings, as well as some of the neat street features, and a compass on a little circular center of the middle piece over there. It'll be really nice. So looking forward to that. And then we have, a quick talk about the master park funding. Another advantageous piece of a tight budget process we've learned is that maybe taking on going through and redoing every one of our pathways all at one time might have been a little bit more to chew off. I think the way it's set up now in our master park funding is we have the ability to go in, take a look, work on something 1 year, get that done, completed, and then move on to the next pieces and give us time to kind of look through. And as that's set up right now, it's $150,000 annually for 4 years, and that'll help us in our master park planning process when we have certain pieces throughout the city that really need some attention. And then finally, on the project side of things, the lights at George Mason Practice Field. Another huge benefit to the community that participates in all the different sports programs will be lights on those fields. The schools will have the ability to really fill that field up with day-to-day activities during the school year. The ability to get on there at nighttime will help them and Recreation and Parks. We've joined together to bring this to the community. Real excited about that. And then the only other thing I think is important as we move forward is just keeping an eye on some of those pieces that Councilperson Hardy mentioned early, and the maintenance and how we're going to keep these things up. And one of our unmet needs that we'll continue to work towards, and I think we're okay. I shouldn't say I think. I know we're okay through this year, but we will need to figure out a way to address some of the unmet needs that we have. I'm sure other departments believe wholeheartedly about theirs as well. But one of them would be all of our court surfaces. allowing those to get too far down the road certainly will cost the city a lot more money further down. But those are just a couple pieces within the unmet needs that we have there. And really, that's about all I have for you, so I'm happy to answer some questions.
All right, thank you very much, and we appreciate the fine services you provide. I think it's one of the jewels in the crown here in the city that really attract families and kids in particular. Ms. Hardy, I bet you have a question. Why don't you go ahead and get started?
For the record, I think I have a lot less questions this year per the city manager's request. Thank you, Danny. Love all the work and the investment we're doing in our parks. And so, as I mentioned earlier when I was asking the chief, I want to make sure that we have the money to maintain what we're building. So I'm hearing from you for now we are okay. Is that what I heard?
Yes, I believe that's correct. We're borderline. We're going to need to invest in those new projects, old projects in order to get there, but we're okay now. And this is a good time for me to thank another department, Public Works, and the Urban Forestry group does just wonderful work in our parks. So I'm looking forward to the new Urban Forestry Committee to helping keep that moving.
Great. The one thing I would maybe add on this list is maybe once the park is built is the downtown park or plaza, whatever we're going to name it. So I know currently it's kind of orphaned because it lives kind of with the EDA, but eventually it's going to be part of our park system, I think. So I want to make sure that we think about the maintenance involved for that, and that, you know, there's budget somewhere in the, you know, whether it's parks or urban forestry or economic development. I know that we've talked about the resource already for that in that downtown coordinator position, help program the park and really make it come alive and make it used. But I think that the day-to-day maintenance, you know, the trash, the, you know, upkeeping the greenery, that sort of thing, is that live somewhere in this budget? Because I guess the park is scheduled to be open hopefully this spring, and this will be for July 1st. So does that live in someone's budget right now? And I'm looking at both Jim and Danny.
I think there's a couple of budgets that have the materials, supplies, and other in it that kind of encompasses, you know, in some of the maintenance pieces. And again, I do appreciate that comment. And there's been discussions, and I think there will be some added maintenance that goes with this, and we did report some of that to the Economic Development Office, and I think some of those numbers went to the Economic Development Authority. So there's probably a little more involved in that downtown plaza. But if I may, for just a moment, stick with some of the basic budget stuff. While I do believe we're fine moving forward, last week there were some emails that circulated and some trash got picked up real quick. And then there was some talk in there somewhere along the way about some volunteers that are willing to do stuff. I do think that there's one coordinated effort that we've started some progress on that we can get back to. And I think once we get a full-time recycling and litter prevention person back in, some of our adopt-a-parks, adopt-a-spots, because you can get, I think we can potentially get a lot more out of some volunteer work in order to help with some of these maintenance pieces. So I did want to mention that.
I think the preliminary estimates are that maintenance of that park, I think Al has been working on that, it's about $15,000 a year is an estimate. And we'll have to see how that works out, but
We're going to find that in the couch cushions.
well, I'm just saying that's a number that has been developed pretty recently.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we're spending a lot of time thinking about building the park and making it kind of a nice place for the downtown. Let's make sure we have money to maintain it and keep it up. So
It's an important item. I'm not certain where that 15,000 lives, but that's the estimate I've heard.
I think that'll be an important conversation when Public Works is here, because you have this park, and that's where the arborist and the tree piece and the green space lives. We've got a lot of new bus shelters that add maintenance, and so I know they've done a deep dive with their operating budget to make sure they can cover the priorities. But it's an ongoing thing. As
what I want to
Danny
avoid is
noted.
come, you know, July 1st, or when the park's been open for a couple months, we're like, well, there's trash overflowing and no one has money in their budget to take care of it. Like, that's the concern. I want to make sure that somewhere in the budget we are funding to take care of all the new stuff we're building, whether it's bus shelters, parks, you know, adding trash cans. We actually have people on the other end to, you know, empty those trash cans.
Well, I did note, I think we sent some pictures out. There was a crew in Public Works doing a great job cleaning all the bus shelters last week. We've had a tough winter, so it was a good time to get started on some of these. But I think the coordination between the various departments, having that dialogue of how do we all work together so we're getting the most out of our efforts? Can we get volunteers involved? And, you know, I think the downtown's a good place to try some of that. We certainly have gotten great response from our colleagues when we've noted there's a problem, and I mean, we saw that last week with Robert Goff's group that, I think it was probably the first nice day we've had where you could actually pick up trash if they get rained or snowed on. They cleared everything up in a day, and that sets an example for the private side to do a good job too, because there was room for improvement there as well. So we're all in that spring cleaning mode at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Connolly? You didn't have anything?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor Charter. Thanks, Danny. So the Howard E. Herman Park, you're working on the Broad Street entrance. There had been some discussion about doing the other two entrances. Is that happening now?
There will be some additional signage at those two entrances.
Yeah.
There's not going to be any, huge welcome to those. It's going to be some signage, and that signage will go in simultaneously. It's not part of this contract, but we're working on that
Okay.
as well.
So that, there had been some talk about having like similar kiosks at all of those, but did that just get budgeted out?
I don't
All these
recall the
memories I
kiosk
have
part of
that-
it, but I do know. I think it was similar signage that we wanted
Okay.
to make sure that all kind of
That matched
rang
up?
a bell as
Yeah,
you
yeah,
got
yeah.
there, and
Okay.
so it won't actually match the archway signage, but it will match each entrance egress.
Okay.
I think I recall Mr. Schlitz saying, "We have enough kiosks," and he said it very confidently.
So everybody's trying to gaslight Mary Beth. Like,
I don't know. I don't know what I remember anymore. And then my other question is just about 184. And Chief Gavin, this also applies to you, which is support for community-sponsored events. This is a priority for future funding, just as a challenge that you face, and I know the police department does as well. That the Recreation and Parks frequently receives requests from businesses, residents, nonprofit groups to hold events in the city, and then you have to absorb the staffing and the funding and the public safety and all that. And I know we had a request earlier this year from the General Heritage Foundation to do their Martin Luther King Jr. Day walk and block off the street, which we did not do this year, but I know that's a request coming for next year, that we're able to do that next year. And I'm just wondering what steps we should put into place to be able to do that, or be able to look at it and decide whether or not that's a good idea.
Well, I think that the staffing for the special events will remain a challenge for us, and we'll follow up with the organizers of that event to make sure that it's safe and effective. But I will say that closing the primary roads is just a really serious thing to do. The traveling public has expectations, and when you close the streets down and put citizens out in the middle of the street, it's one thing for utility workers with all their reflective gear and everything like that, but you put citizens out in a transportation facility, we just take that very seriously, and you just have to do it right, and that's expensive.
So I'm wondering if, just to get ahead of that, since we know that request is coming, if there's a way to figure out how much that would cost, or work on a city policy about closing, do we have a policy about closing streets, or it's just a best practice that we follow?
We discourage it.
We discourage it, right.
So, the watch night is the exception.
Right.
And, but it's an area of policy I think maybe we need to follow up on and discuss, because that is our posture right now, is that we generally do not embrace the idea.
Right.
The difference between us and our partners, North and Arlington and Fairfax, is they have divisions that do nothing but special events to close down roadways. They also have, in terms of special event, they have a special operations division that has probably 40 civilian staff that they can put out on each and every post to shut down a roadway, that it costs a lot less than a police officer. I have 2, and that would take one intersection, or possibly in some instances half an intersection. And so we just don't have the manpower to do it. And then to close off what would be Washington Street or Lee Highway in some instances is a state function as well. So they'd have to apply through the state, and we'd have to have approval for that, and we'd have to show a plan. And then in terms of how do we get there, we'd have to have every driveway and the expectations of the jurisdiction surrounding us to have every driveway, roadway, and intersection covered. We have a hard time doing that Memorial Day Oftentimes, we just have barricades because we don't have the bodies. But it costs a lot, but we'll work on that. We'll work on that so they know what the cost would be.
Right. It would just be good to get ahead of what would the cost be and what are the requirements to find out if this is something we can or cannot do.
Sure.
Thank you.
I would add to that even if we came up with the cost, I'm not sure we have the human resources to pull it off. So there really is a large demand. So Memorial Day was mentioned, and we don't even use a major thoroughfare for that. So shutting down that street, and the human resources not on recreation parks, but more public safety and public works. So even if we come up with a perfect number and they say, okay, we've got that check ready for you to go, I'm not sure even then we can say yes. But on the bright side of things, I do want to say that this is an initiative that we really do want to solve, and we want to find a way to say yes to some of these applications. And Recreation and Parks is willing to be the group that kind of gets the applications, filters it through the other departments, find a way to say yes to have some more events within the community. It's been more challenging than I thought it would be, and it is an expensive proposition, and I think we're going to have to get a cooperative agreement with some of these groups that, okay, we might be able to help you with, half of the human resources and some of the public work stuff. You're going to have to, help on your side making this happen. It's not as simple as saying yes and then pulling together and making it happen. And I know Chief Gavin feels the same way. She also we'd both like to say yes more often. It's just logistically just not as simple as it seemed when I first started looking into it.
Thanks.
All right, who's next? Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yep. So to special events, I mean, first of all, Danny, what your department does, I mean, is the reason that I'm here. Frankly, it was the reason that we were attracted to Falls Church. I mean, all of you guys have wonderful staff and do wonderful things, but what Parks and Rec does is really kind of I consider the tip of the spear, right? When you're looking at the community, you're deciding to move here, open up a business here. I mean, it's what Parks and Rec does that typically catches the eye of somebody that may be passing through or living in the area. So what you guys do is incredibly important. And
Depends
similar
on
to
where that spear's intended.
What's that? Oh. We'll get to the urban farming in a second. But similar to my comments for Jim, and this is something that's a priority for me as we've started to kind of move through the difficult parts of the planning process for the development, and that is when you talk about things related to walkability, we talk about revenue challenges, we talk about diversified housing mixes. A lot of that hinges on activating the city in as many ways as absolutely possible, and getting people out in the streets, getting them to events, whether they're walking to the community center, whether they're going to a brand new fishing pond and a complete ecosystem built on the Fellows property, whatever that happens to be, it's important for us to activate the city in as many ways as possible. And I know that the challenge with budgets year in and year out, especially given guidance from council, but maybe this is just preaching a little bit, but if it's not in this budget, it's got to be in next year's budget, that we have to make the investments in that tip of the spear for the community, both for citizens and businesses, to make sure that we capitalize, monetize on all of the development and all the money that we're pouring into capital projects. And that's, it starts with Parks and Rec, it goes through economic development, police to maintain and protect everything, and throughout the rest of the divisions. But it's incredibly important for us to think from a visionary perspective what we can do to activate the city. And so whether it's events, whether it's just kind of general community planning, from a summer perspective for the kids, but we've really got to start thinking about where we need to put those extra bodies, because I do understand when it comes to a planning perspective for you guys, it's not just about extra money, it's about making sure that you've got the human capital to pull that off. And I think it's really, really important that we're going to miss a huge opportunity for the city and taking advantage of all the hard work that we're putting into the capital projects.
All right, thank you. Are there any other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Danny, you'd mentioned the lighted multipurpose field up at the new, is that in the budget? I mean, we're going to have lights on that multipurpose field?
Yeah, it's in the CIP.
Mm-hmm.
Half of it is, the project's in the CIP. The schools in the city are coordinating together to come up with the total amount, about $400,000, $200 of it through Recreation Park side.
For FY '21.
So it's our expectation that when the facility, that part of the facility opens up, that the multipurpose field will be lit with the newest, most energy efficient lighting and so forth.
Yeah, Danny worked with the school so that it would time with the high school construction.
Okay.
FY '21.
Okay, great. In that same vein, and taking off on the bullet point here on page 186, maintaining our quality athletic programs during the construction of the high school campus is a priority. I don't want to make this too long a shaggy dog story, but this morning there was a meeting up at central office that involved Sevi and Julie and, the school's facilities folks with some of the baseball coaches and parents and boosters around the issue of, the status of the field right now, and I think there are some drainage problems and so forth that they're going to take some immediate steps to try to deal with. That was one takeaway from the meeting. Maybe as soon as this afternoon there was a meeting and they're talking about doing some things on spring break. But the larger question that I'm trying to get at here, and everybody who's in the room are the key people to make sure that there is a coordination. The current plans call for a terrific multi-purpose field and a brand new softball stadium with a press box. It looks great. The tennis court's going to be wonderful. But the current plans for the school do not contemplate any change at all in the baseball field, which has issues going back certainly to my time in 2006 or so that are still persistent. In fact, have even gotten worse apparently as far as drainage and subsidence of the field on one side and so forth. And I just want to try to do whatever I can to facilitate you all getting in the room together and asking the question, is there anything, while we've got all the equipment up there, all the bulldozers, all the, as I understand it right now, the plans call for literally like, here's the baseball fence. Okay, well, we're not touching anything on the baseball field side of that fence. And that, I think the reason given was, well, it just costs too much. We just can't touch it. Well, I don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. If there are things that could be done because equipment and expertise, engineers and architects and so forth are deployed, could you all at least try to get together in a room and see if some of the longstanding problems could be addressed? I mean, it doesn't have to be really drastic, I think. If it's a regrading to send the field water where it's supposed to go, that, that's a big deal, but it's not, it's not an enormous deal compared to the $120 million price tag. And, there's some discussion of moving home plate out about halfway to the pitcher's mound because the fence is already, they're like $399, which is at least 25 feet more than you need for high school baseball. And that would give you some flexibility to make some improvements in the dugouts, which are a mess, and the stands, which have there's no place you can sit at that, as you well know, at that stadium and actually see the whole game. It's poorly designed. You could leave the enormous towers that hold up the nets in place if you moved things in front of that and put in place a sort of a traditional backstop. At any rate, I'm not going to try to design a baseball field, although I don't think I could do any worse a job than whoever did it 20 years ago. But I would hope that you all would take that on board and see if there's something that we can do right here and right now so that when we finish this terrific school with an excellent athletic complex, we don't then just look over and say, wow, that baseball field looks like super shabby. What was the deal with that? So that's my ask. I don't expect an answer tonight, but just to make you aware that that conversation was going on this morning. So Peter was not there, but I'm sure people have reported to him. So by the time the campus coordinating committee meeting Friday morning, maybe it could be an item of discussion.
I did hear about that meeting about 20 minutes before this meeting, so it was the first I'd heard about it. And that is a facility that we could use a lot more if it were in better condition. So
it's, what Mr. Littinghouse said is absolutely correct, and there was discussion this morning's meeting about the potential for a quality baseball field up there to be a community, in fact, even a regional magnet. We all know that there's just not that many good lighted baseball fields, and if we could, pair that with a great softball and tennis and multipurpose facility, it would have the potential to generate revenue and certainly would generate, feet on the street to support the commercial development in the Falls Church Gateway project. Because, anybody who's had kids in sports knows that you get there an hour early and what do? You want to go get a coffee. And most places that you end up at, you got to get in your car to go get that. If you could actually, Falls Church develop a reputation as a place where, it's a great facility and you can just walk right over there and get a bite to eat or get some coffee. It would be a economic driver as well as a community building asset.
All right, any other questions or comments? If not, thank you so much for your good work, and we know you've all got a lot on your plate and making do with limited resources, which we appreciate. We've got an ambitious capital improvement project plan, and but anyway, appreciate your good work, and thank you for coming out this evening. All right, and the last item is just schedule or council requests. Are there any council requests or scheduling items?
Before you get there, can I just point out that in your packet you have the 3 legislation pieces. One is an ordinance for the budget, and then the tax, and the CIP, the tax rate. So we'll bring that for the first reading over on to council on March 25th.
All right, thank you.
And for a public hearing.
Any council? Yes, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, I was traveling when we had this meeting with the exotic animal ordinance. Do we have that planned for council session yet? The amount of email traffic I get on that compared to anything else in the city, I'd really like to get that put to bed.
We have not set the date. We will set a date soon, but we're working on a compromise, I think. And so we'll get back to the council very shortly on that.
That'd be great if we could just put that to bed. So, thanks.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
I just wanted to share with everybody that this afternoon I attended the Northern Virginia Dental Clinic 25th anniversary, which is they had a big party, and all these dentists and people who provided this book. Falls Church City citizens participate in the Northern Virginia Dental Clinic, which offers free dental services to adults. We have 3 slots per month, and Leslyn Barrow was there as well, and she said we use them all the time. They have a center in Fairfax and a center in Sterling, and it's a wonderful resource that's been around for 25 years and run almost exclusively by volunteers. So they presented us with this yearbook, which I'll be happy to share with everyone. You can thank your dentist, because most dentists are involved in that.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks very much. Mayor, at the beginning, you asked for a moment of silence, and I just wanted to note that we were able to attend, some of us were able to attend the vigil at the mosque on Saturday night. It was a very moving experience, and the amount of hospitality that was shown by the attendees, the regular attendees of the mosque, for those of us who aren't regular attendees, was frankly phenomenal. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hardy?
Wyatt, given our kind of compressed schedule to review the comprehensive agreement and the SEE on April 8th, I was wondering whether we should actually extend the invitation to include the EDA and Planning Commission, so especially if the EDA is going to be a party to the CA, having some extra eyes in that work session might be helpful.
I think it's a good idea. I think the Planning Commission will have a meeting that night, but we will work to see if we can coordinate and have them here as well. We certainly can invite the EDA. And I've been working with Mr. Snyder to make sure that the EDA is informed as we go through this process. And so we'll continue to do that so they're not coming into it cold.
While the mayor's busy working my way back on calendar questions, the 25th, the Pinwheel Garden planting, I've seen 6:30 and 7 as the start time. Do we know which one it is? Before our meeting Monday, the 25th?
Yeah, I don't
The
know
schedule
exactly.
here says 6:30.
Why don't we
Okay.
just confirm and
Well,
get
let's
out an
just
email
Let it-
prior?
we'll
Sort that
clarify.
out, make sure everybody knows when they're supposed to show up. And the Sunday is a Sunday series forum, which is gonna be also including the budget, or, I mean, are you like splitting it in threes, or is it mostly
Yeah,
a city-driven thing, since we did mostly schools last time, or?
We'll have to figure out the choreography of it, but we do want to present on the budget and give updates on the project as well. I mean, it's a lot to cover, but we'll try to be tight.
And your campus coordinating committee meets Friday morning, so you guys are going to see a lot of each other. Finally, the chamber meets tomorrow in its monthly luncheon, and is to hear from the Falls Church Gateway partners. In case anybody out there listening in Radio Land hasn't seen the presentation, that's another opportunity at 11:30 at the Italian Cafe.
All right, thank you. Anything else that anyone has this afternoon or this evening? If not, why don't we go ahead and adjourn and call it a night, and thank you all again for coming out.
Great. Thank you, council.